Welcome back to the Barbell Medicine Podcast, where we bring modern medicine to strength and conditioning and strength and conditioning to modern medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum, and this is the third edition of The Rundown, where we catch you up on the latest news in health and fitness, also science, technology, sports, and politics. On the other end of the line is the second most handsome doctor in North America, Dr. Austin Baraki. What's going on, man?
Hey, doing well. Continuing to settle into the new place. Got some productive training in this week. Things are feeling good. So I assume you're feeling poorly, but I'll take it.
Yeah. Look, hey, it's time. It's the balance of power. No, I feel fine.
All right, good.
Yeah, so far, knock on wood. I'm not superstitious. I'm just a little stitious. No, I'm excited for this episode. Got a lot of cool stuff. Some new bionic knee parts. We've got some politics to do with RFK Jr. We've got some impressive feats of strength that will probably trigger some folks. Hopefully.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Before we get into that, a few announcements. Big news this week. We are having a coaching sale now. If you've been a Barbell Medicine follower, you are familiar with our stuff. You know this never happens. We literally do it only once a year over like Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So in November, we're doing one here in the summer. It starts August 11th and it goes till August 18th. It applies to all new coaching packages. So that's for both health and performance and pain and rehab. You get 10% off. You can use the code SUMMERFIT to check out directly off the website, or you can email us, support@barbellmedicine.com, and we can get you set up. Again, it's 10% off all new coaching packages, and we never do this. So if you're on the fence about coaching, now's the time. Also, we did just release our second generation of our low fatigue template. This has 4 new programs in it. Previously, it was powerlifting only, strength only, and now we have powerlifting, power building, and a general strength conditioning program. So you get 4 programs. They're all 16 weeks long. The programming has been revised. It's now more adaptive to the individual to make sure that they get the correct training load. The conditioning work has also been massively overhauled, and we've expanded the ebook that accompanies the program. So it used to be about 80-something pages. Now it's over 110 pages, and we discuss hypertrophy, conditioning, programming, design, troubleshooting, and more. So if you're looking for a book on like how to program, that's what we have right now. And last but not least, we do still have our upcoming seminar in San Antonio. It's a health and performance seminar with myself, Dr. Baraki, Leah Lutz, Tom Campitelli. We'll be at Sal's gym in San Antonio. So we'll be training together on Friday night. I believe there's a barbecue on Saturday. I think I just got that email. So we're just trying to spend some more time with you guys. Tickets are going fairly quickly. So that's linked in the show notes below. We'd love to see you there. 2-day in-person seminar, San Antonio. Catch the fever. Maybe don't catch a fever. Maybe don't catch a real fever. Like, I'm using that in jest. All right. We're going to start off this third episode of The Rundown with a bionic knee. I don't know. Did you see this at all?
I did not. Educate me.
All right. So this just came out of MIT. These researchers have developed a new bionic knee that can help people with above-the-knee amputations walk faster, climb stairs, and navigate obstacles better than they could do with their traditional prosthesis. Now, in the link that I put in the show notes below, there's actually a pretty cool embedded GIF where it's a person with a full-on prosthetic. It doesn't look like any prosthetic I think most people have ever seen, because it kind of looks like, for lack of a better description, like imagine what Terminator T2's leg looked like. It looks cool. And this person's like dodging obstacles on a treadmill, like
Wow.
with their prosthetic. Yeah, which is super impressive. So with traditional amputation, whether it's below the knee or above the knee, the opposing muscles that take turns stretching, relaxing, contracting are usually severed. So the agonist-antagonist relationship's disrupted. Makes it very difficult for the brain and the nervous system to sense the position of the muscles, how fast they're moving, and subsequently smooth it out for better coordination. It's just really hard to do. Now, a new surgical approach is called this agonist-antagonist myoneural interface, AMI, basically connects agonist and antagonist muscles back together in what's left of the limb. Previously, this was only done in below the knee, and now they're doing it above the knee. And this research group added this kind of robotic controller. So basically, they put a titanium rod in the femur, and it has 16 wires that go to sensors in the muscles of the leg that are still there. And this robot basically integrates all this information and calculates the torque and forces necessary to move the prosthesis the way the user wants it to move. Now, look, that's all above our pay grade.
Totally.
But when I saw this video, it's one of those things like seeing is believing, right? I'm like, okay, look at the data. Now, I linked the paper from Science. They talk about this, and it's linked to other papers, so you can really go down the rabbit hole if you want, but watch the video. I mean, pretty impressive stuff, especially from what I've seen from people with this type of prosthesis before. So I can only imagine the cost of what this is right now. But, some time from now, just like all technology, it's probably going to become more accessible, at least I hope. So I don't know. Did you click on the link? Quick question. Obstacles.
Yeah, that is really remarkable. I also seeing where he's like kicking some exercise balls around, the level
Yeah.
of coordination that you're seeing out of this. I guess they're calling it a bionic knee is quite impressive. That is just a level of complexity that I struggle to even wrap my mind around, how people are able to figure this out and make it work even to this level of accuracy and precision. It's obviously, not so smoothly coordinated that to the point where you're like, oh, I can barely even tell that that's not a human limb. There's obviously still some kind of like clunkiness about it that I imagine would improve with time, refining the technology, the human themselves getting used to this thing. And
Totally.
I wouldn't be surprised if they try to bake in some sort of like AI based functionality into these little robots to, better integrate these systems. So yeah, I'm with you. I think this is really remarkable. It bodes well for the future of, I guess physical medicine and rehabilitation for these kind of things in the future.
Yeah.
Both due to traumatic reasons and really all of the different types of medical reasons why people might undergo these types of procedures to try to maintain as much functionality as possible over time. It does remind me of not exactly the same thing, but another area that I'm kind of currently aware of in the rehabilitation space, where people are also integrating kind of AI based kind of rehab coaches into like home exercise devices to try to improve both adherence to these home exercise programs, but also outcomes. So like gamification of like the rehab exercises being like kind of autonomously coached by the AI tool to get people putting out more force or power output or whatever the case is, because doing that from the standpoint of a rehab professional, a person who maybe needs to come to your house and guide you through this, is time consuming and expensive. And so these sorts of things can also facilitate potentially better outcomes at a lower cost. This bionic knee thing, I don't imagine is currently at a lower cost. To your point, it'll probably come down over time. The only, I guess, concern that I can think of at the moment is just from the medical side of things, complications of this sort of thing. I see a fair amount of peri-procedural complications or complications of technology and devices and implants and things like that in the patients that I work with. And then also this technology just looks so damn complex that I suspect it is, it's going to break in unforeseeable ways. And the kind of repair, maintenance, long term, is this something that you can live and function with for like decades? What's that going to even look like? Obviously, it's just so early that nobody will have an answer to that. But those are some of the things I'm thinking about moving forward.
Clearly, you're overlooking two of the most likely doomsday scenarios. One actually isn't a doomsday scenario; it's just would be more interesting, I think, socially. Okay, but the first one: what if aliens are able to overtake, these things, or AI gains, autonomous function?
You have an autonomously functioning limb that takes over the human host.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, and then it makes you ambulate towards the center, and now you're like, oh no, I can't stop. Obviously, that's terrifying. Second thing is maybe a little more interesting, perhaps even more likely. You familiar with what was Oscar Pistorius?
Yes.
Blade Runner?
Yeah.
Couldn't compete in the Olympics, right? That was the whole thing. What if this stuff gets so good that whether it's a below the knee amputation, above the knee amputation, or even like something congenital, they get this prosthesis. It's so good that they can kick a soccer ball way faster than anybody, or I don't know. At that point, it's like, so is this like performance enhancing equipment? That's just, I don't know. Like I've had some mixed feelings when the Pistorius case was brought before the Court for Arbitration in Sport for the IOC. So I don't know. Kind of interesting, anyway.
Yeah, and I think for this sort of bionic knee / lower extremity, there is probably a known or measurable like maximum force production capacity of these units.
Mm-hmm.
And once that force capacity exceeds that of what humans are capable of, then you'll know we're in like, exoskeletal athlete era.
Yeah, upgrades. Trying to get my upgrades, bro.
There you go.
Nice. All right. Next thing here on the rundown. Now, look, as a person who's been involved in motorcycles and specifically motocross for decades now, you knew at some point this
They
was
had
going
to
to
come
make.
up.
Yeah. Well, look, this made national news, so it's not just my own like pet interest. This made national news. It was on ESPN, NBC. I know reported on this, etc. So this past week marked the 44th running of the American Motorcycle Association, the AMA's Amateur National Motocross Championship. It's held every year at Loretta Lynn's Ranch just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I actually went there, competed in 2003. I didn't do very well, but just making it there was cool with my dad.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, memories and such. The biggest amateur race in the world. It's uber competitive, very, very competitive. So just making it to the ranch is a big deal. Let alone winning. Oh boy, kind of set yourself up for not only support as far as from teams and stuff like that, but actually just to make it. So they have classes separated based on age. There's age group classes, also skill. So there's like a pro division, intermediate division, et cetera, and displacement of the motor. So same thing for most motorsports. However, there are only 2 classes dedicated to women. There's an open women's class, and then there's a girls class, 11 to 16 years old. So not terribly well represented, but there's still an opportunity to compete.
Do you know when those women's classes were established?
I know that both of those classes were there when I was there.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So
I
but
can't say that I've ever even seen like a women's motocross race like on TV in the same way that I might see men's races. I don't know what your thoughts are on any of that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but history was made this year, however, when 11-year-old Raycin Kyler, she's out of Florida, beat all of the boys in the 65cc 10 to 11 years old class. So 65cc is the size of the motor. These a little mini bike, but it does have a clutch and you have to shift it and everything else. These people fly on these things. I actually realized that now I was a vet rider when I think I'm going pretty well. You know, I was fairly competitive back in the day. And I think I'm doing the jumps and out there for a while. And then one of these little rippers just goes past me and I'm like, oh boy, I got to hang it up. In any case, this has never happened before. Never happened before. And it's not that people haven't tried. There have been girls that have made the open division and done well, and women who've done it in some of the older age division classes, but they've never won. Mm-hmm. Which brings me to my question. One, let's celebrate Raycin Kyler. If your name's Raycin, to you, you got to be fake. You were literally, you were born for this. But 2, why has this never happened before? Especially in these age groups, these prepubescent age groups. We know that like up until the age of around 10, girls and boys have similar bodies. Yeah, girls are a little taller even. They do have a little more body fat at that age, but most athletic traits are nearly indistinguishable in boys and girls at that age, except for throwing. But for example, like top running speed is almost identical, VO2 max stuff, all basically the same until puberty, right? At that point, things take off, and most of that is due to this SRY gene. This is basically the sex-determining region Y is what it stands for. If there was an athlete gene, athletic gene, it would be the SRY gene. It's on the Y chromosome. Boys have an XY, generally speaking. Women XX. But we all begin life as females. For like our first 6 weeks in utero, we're all effectively female. At week 6, if you get exposed to testosterone, a lot of it in utero, the SRY gene signals a bunch of other stuff. You get testicles that form, and inside them, the Leydig cells that ultimately produce testosterone. And so, that's kind of how we differentiate between boys and girls in the womb. So we know that boys, even before puberty, are better at throwing. That's been well established. There's like 3 standard deviations apart from boys and girls from like the beginning of when they can throw, even through puberty and beyond. Obviously, a girl who is trained in throwing is going to be better than an untrained man, but that's not really what we're talking about here. All else being equal, boys tend to throw further. There's also, I didn't know this, some evidence showing that boys are better at like visually tracking and targeting things. And so I do wonder, is there something about boys that makes them better at motocross than women, or is this just an artifact of like the opportunity to participate, right? Just like a social kind of determinant of competitiveness or something like that.
Yeah, these things are super messy and difficult to pull apart. I think that's part of why I asked the question earlier, because we've looked at, for example, in other sports, like when they were established. We've talked before about like when weightlifting was established for men versus women in the Olympics was like hugely, separated in time. Do you remember those years off the top of your head?
Yeah. So if you're listening to this, I'll pose it to the audience. So just right now in your own head, hey, quick question. when did women's Olympic weightlifting make it into the Olympics? I'll pause. If you said the year 2000, you'd be right. If you said any time before that, despite men being in multiple, I mean, we're talking about way back in Olympic history for men to have this opportunity to participate in the Olympics. It wasn't even until 2000. Yeah. With women's motor, just to answer your question, because I think this will be useful for your answer. Women's professional motocross has been very small. And under supported, and there's been less opportunity for women to participate at that level. That said, there's also not a lot of women who otherwise would participate. So if this is a chicken egg thing, I don't know. That's obviously more complicated. But growing up in motocross, going to a lot of the national races, you see a fairly, what I would consider, strong contingent of women, particularly or mostly girls, right? And then it's like kind of up until high school age, and then it really starts to fall off.
Sure.
And again, I don't know if that's because there's really nowhere for them to go, like class-wise, to participate outside of like at the national level. And at that point, that's a different game than competing locally, where it's like, oh, I showed up my local track and there was these other girls that I race against. They've all quit or like didn't exist in the first place. So I don't know if this is like an artifact of social determinants, like participation opportunity, or if there's like some like male aggressiveness or like visual tracking. I don't know. I'm kind of curious.
To some extent, it feels like some of these things might feed into one another. As far as the social like opportunities to participate, it feels like there's multiple levels to that. For example, is there a league where you can go and do this at all? But then there's also like, I suspect that this varies regionally across the country. Some places that are much more into motorsports, like where you hail from, and other places in the country where that's way less of a thing, and other sports and activities might tend to predominate. And then lastly, there's probably some degree of, it's almost like this bio and social interaction here of like these, to the extent that these biological characteristics or traits impact the performance potential of someone in these sports, that itself might impact the demand for this for a given demographic, right? So if there is some sort of advantage for the boys or disadvantage for the girls, that would then impact how much of a demand is there for women's motocross, and then how likely is there, based on that demand, for someone to establish a league where they can come and compete. So these things all to some extent seem like they might feed into one another until you reach some just like overall critical mass of recognition of the sport or interest in the sport where it's like, hey, we got enough people who would actually bother to do this. And then from there, it might snowball into a much bigger thing. I suspect that that's the case for a lot of different sports. You need some like critical mass of just like potentially interested participants before somebody even bothers to set up a competitive arena for them.
To create the incentives that otherwise would drive further development. Like there's no like the path from like 5-year-old girl motocross, enthusiast to pro is not well established, right? It's just like tough to do. Yeah, I don't know. What's interesting to me about motocross is that when you see the top level performers, in the pro ranks, generally speaking, there's somewhere between like 20 and 25. You start getting a little older than that. People are like, when are you retiring? Which seems weird to say to like a 26, 27-year-old. But if you're 30 and you're still racing, you are definitively an elder statesman. You're that class pretty much. But the best performers aren't like big, hulking, super strong. They're strong because they're 24-year-old dudes, but it's not like, gaining 10 pounds of muscle mass is going to make you better on the bike. It's mostly skill related. And sure, the cardiorespiratory demands, the VO2 max requirements are relatively high, but it's mostly skill. It's very similar to swimming in that like a good swimmer, like an elite level swimmer who'd been retired and their VO2 max is in the tank, is still going to beat like the triathlete who's like not a good swimmer but has a crazy high VO2 max. So I just wonder, I'm like, it's not a strength thing. I think the cardiorespiratory requirements can be developed by women. So I'm trying to think like, is this like, again, I go back to aggressiveness, visual tracking. I don't know. But it seems to me right now, like the biggest driver of this has to just be opportunity and like in general interest. And so it's like, look, well, not that many girls do this. There's not going to be many girls doing this. And so just the sample size is too low to get something like this. That's why this is so dang historic. Good job racing.
Yeah, super, super interesting kind of concept. And then even to look at a different sport that has, I would say, developed and maybe even arguably peaked and gone into decline on a shorter time frame is CrossFit. So like you think about the level of performance that was being put up by all the athletes in general, and certainly men versus women, like at the first ever CrossFit Games, and you contrast that to where people are now. Where like Lorraine, my wife, still pays attention to the CrossFit Games just out of interest, and they just happened this past week.
Oh, we're gonna talk about it.
And yeah, and Tia Claire wins, and they're interviewing her, and they're like talking to her about her training, and she's like, "Yeah, I just do what the boys do, and then aim for a little bit more." And it's like, well, you have selected yourself into like an ultra elite category, and that's why you keep winning year after year, and no one else is even close to you. But the sport had to attract enough people to even get in before you can start to identify those folks who maybe have certain levels, traits or talents or, biological gifts, if you want to think of it that way, to let them to rise to the top. Otherwise, they'll, never come to attention and no one will ever know any different.
Yeah, I'll be very curious to see what happens with this particular athlete's career. Like, so now after she wins,
she has identified herself.
Yeah, like how do you do next year? Because there's another class. The next one, age up, is another displacement size up, and like, does she keep doing this well? And if so, like, that would be remarkable, and maybe that does pave the path. I don't know. I'll be curious.
Yep,
we'll see. All right, back here on the rundown, third episode, we're going to talk about impressive feats of strength. Got 3 of them here. First off, we'll start with Thor's deadlift. Did you see this?
I did.
505 kilogram deadlift. That's 1,113 pounds. You do not need to adjust your headset. That is 1,113 pounds, breaking his previous record of 1,104 pounds that he set 5 years ago back in 2020. Crazy. Now, before we discuss this, the equipment that he used, this is important for the comparison I'm going to ask you about. He had a double ply deadlift suit. Now, if you're not familiar with powerlifting, what a deadlift suit is, what is double ply, you're like, toilet paper. It doesn't make any sense. I agree. Look, equipped powerlifting is where you get to use assisted equipment. So like a squat suit, for example, it stores mechanical energy as you descend. Knee wraps do the same thing, store mechanical energy as you load the actual material, and then as you go down in a squat, for example, and then on the way up, it helps you lift more weight. It's a completely different experience. It's like almost a completely different sport, except for you're still using a barbell. But in any case, the double ply deadlift suit is 2 layers of material. That's why they call it double ply. And I can't speak to how it works because I don't know. And I don't know that anybody really knows. It's more in the squat, you tend to get more out of the suits than you do in the deadlifts. But I assume there's some sort of assistance. Otherwise, they wouldn't use it. He's also using figure 8 straps, so wrist straps. Listeners may be more familiar with a regular wrist strap that you use to wrap around a dumbbell or a barbell. Figure 8 straps are usually a little bit longer, more robust. That tends to set the bar a little bit lower in your hand. So again, this is important for comparison purposes. He's using a Texas deadlift bar, which I appreciated that they used that and not the Rogue Elephant bar, which is like
extra long and thin to make it bendier.
Yeah, the reason why that type of barbell matters, one, if it's a deadlift bar, which you can generally identify by lack of a center knurling, it also is a thinner diameter. A regular power bar is 29 millimeters in diameter. A deadlift bar is 27 millimeters in diameter. They also are a little bit longer, and so it makes the bar deflect more or bend more before the plates leave the floor, which for some individuals, that makes them be able to lift more weight. I don't get a lot out of a deadlift bar, meaning that my regular deadlift with a stiff, power bar is about the same as my deadlift, but some people get a lot out of them, especially with straps. But he did use calibrated plates, which I also appreciated, compared to Benny Magnuson's 1,008 or 1,003 or whatever it was, which was no straps, no deadlift suit, but not calibrated plates. In any case, let's compare Thor's recent world record, 1,113-pound deadlift with straps, with a deadlift suit, with a deadlift bar, to Georgian powerlifters Timur Semkarzadeh. I definitely messed that up. I'm so sorry.
Respect the effort.
But at the age of 24, he deadlifted 906 pounds in the IPF, the International Powerlifting Federation. So it's drug tested, no straps, stiff powerlifting bars, 29 millimeters in diameter, 2-hour weigh-in, drug tested, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and by the way, that same day, he squatted 859 pounds and bench pressed 534 pounds for a 2,300-pound total. His total at 2,300 pounds was about 100 pounds less than Thor's total that he also did. And he weighed about 100 pounds less than Thor. So who's more impressive, Dr. Baraki? Thor or Timur?
The two of us opining on the relative impressiveness of these feats is kind of amusing to me. But I think you make the point there at the end that Teamer's total was about 100 pounds less, weighing 100 pounds less under much stricter conditions. And so I think that that's kind of where I might lean. It's interesting to, I don't know, it's not even like a thought experiment. It's just like imagining or wondering if you put Thor under those same competitive conditions, circumstances, would he be able to put up those same numbers? I'm not sure. I don't know how much he can currently squat. I feel like all I've ever seen him do is in the powerlifting realm. I've seen lots of his deadlifts. I don't know off the top of my head like what his raw squat performance might be unassisted, unequipped in that type of a setting. I don't know if you have a sense of that.
Yeah, he squatted, I believe it was 906 in knee wraps, but in a regular singlet when he did his total, but no weigh in, right?
Sure. Yeah.
With the squat bar, it's different. It's just a different set of.
Right. That's why I'm trying to come at it of like, if you put each of these guys in the other person's circumstance, how close could they get to that type of performance? And, they'd probably be kind of close. I think Teamer, though, weighing 100 pounds less to do it, he's probably also quite a bit different in height. I don't know what his height is off the top of my head either. But yeah, I currently lean towards the IPF competitive conditions as the thing that's more impressive to put up that total. But then again, all these things are just absolute wild feats of human strength.
Yeah, all these numbers don't make sense. I know if you were listening to this and you're like, the numbers don't make sense because they're too heavy. I agree. These people are far too strong, and it hurts my feelings personally. But with your thought experiment, it's like a bench racing kind of thing. Like, what if?
Yeah.
I think if you put Thor in the IPF setting, he totals far less than his best total. Drug testing aside, let's just leave that elephant in the room. We just won't talk about it.
Yeah.
And then if you put Teamer under the same circumstances as Thor, I don't know that he totals that much more. You know what I'm saying?
Not being well trained in that, the technical things that change under equipped lifting and various other things that make it almost, people sometimes describe them as different sports, and it might sound silly to say when it's like you're doing the same lifts, but there are significant technical differences between equipped and unequipped lifting, and under these different types of competitive kind of rules and circumstances that do make them a little bit more difficult to compare directly than it might initially seem.
Yeah, I'll just say this. Obviously, both individuals super strong, and I'm super impressed with all of these attempts.
Yeah.
Full props. No hate comms, full props. However, if instead of Thor breaking his own record, which was previously 501 kilos, under, wearing a deadlift suit with straps, whatever, if he instead said, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to use a stiff bar. I'm going to not use straps, and I'm going to do it raw. And he was able to deadlift 910 pounds. That way, I'd be like, dude, you're the king.
Yeah.
You're
easy.
The king of yeah. And this is just a throwback. A lot of our listeners probably are unfamiliar with Konstantinov because he passed away a number of years ago. But he previously is on record saying that, look, under IPF settings, stiff bar, calibrated plates, 2-hour weigh-in, the whole thing, drug testing aside, people can only deadlift 400 kilos. That's it, 880. And so we have two couple examples, because Jesus also deadlifted more than that. I think it was 901. Again, these numbers don't make sense. You're just like, Jordan, what are you talking about? Like, there's a lot of weight. I agree. So I'm super impressed, but I would have been more impressed with what would be more relatable as a deadlift. Like, yeah, take the straps off, take the suit off. If you want to use a deadlift bar, fine, I guess. But I would prefer you on a stiff bar. Just see. I'd be curious.
Yeah, it makes these kinds of comparisons easier. That's kind of the thing in sport in general. If somebody set a new swimming world record, but they were swimming in a pool of different length, and they weren't swimming in water, but some substance that had different fluid properties. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. That's part of why, in swimming, my background as opposed to your motocross, the whole supersuit era was such a thing where all this rapid technological advancement happened, in the early to mid 2000s, and people started wearing higher and higher tech suits, and they started to get concerned about well, how much buoyancy is this providing? And all these records were getting smashed. And so then they got, for the most part, banned. And now we're under a much more strict set of circumstances, almost IPF circumstances and rules around what you can wear to race. And sure enough, humans continue to rise to the occasion, and just about all, if not all, of the world records from that time. I think Rome 2009 was the last time that they were really allowed in competition. Most of those records are gone because people have just kept getting better and better, and ended up breaking them all anyway, even under the stricter circumstances. So that's kind of an interesting way to come at it. Is these circumstances, set the bounds for kind of comparison and competition, and then within those bounds, you just let the best rise to the top, and over time, people seem to keep finding ways to get better and better across all sorts of different sports, which is awesome to watch.
Yeah, a lot of technological advancements across many different sports have been the principal, or at least even a minority contribution to people breaking records.
Yeah.
I don't know that these are all technological advancements here, for Thor and such, but we're just comparing two different efforts, and it's challenging to do. And so I would prefer just make it the same.
Yep.
But yeah, probably not in our lifetime.
Yeah.
All right. The second impressive feat of strength is by Russ Orhii. You sent this to me. I was made aware of it. It's just crazy. So Russ Orhii just broke the 93 kilo world record for the raw powerlifting total and also the squat. So 93 kilo class is my weight class, our weight class. Well, your old weight class when you were still, an adult man. 205 pounds, that's the max you can weigh. And while competing in the 2025 North American Powerlifting Federation Pan Am Championships, Russ, he competed in the 93 kilo class. This is in Grand Cayman. He squatted 783 pounds. He bench pressed 457 pounds, and he deadlifted 781 pounds. Again, these numbers don't make sense because they're too high. I agree. They're too high. His total was 2,019 pounds while weighing 201 pounds body weight. So he has a 10x body weight total, which is that's powerlifting, legendhood. You've now achieved legendary status. You're one of the best. That's incredible. Is also 25 kilos better than the previous record holder, Jonathan Keiko. That record was set in 2023 at the World Championships. So my question to you is not just how impressive Russ is. He is impressive. But previously, he was an 83 kilo lifter, and his best total, despite competing for a number of years, was 100 pounds less. So is this just mass moves mass? He moved up a weight class? Or what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that mass moves mass is it's arguably an oversimplification of an important concept, I think. The dude, if anybody's seen Russ Orhii, I mean, you said his weight class at 205, but failed to mention his height. I believe he is 5'7".
Maybe.
Or something like that. So he is a muscle ball.
He's a nugget. He's a muscle nugget. I met him at Barbell Brigade in LA in 2016. Now, at the time, he had not competed in powerlifting, but I see this dude with 585 on a bar, squatting, and he's doing sets of 6. And I'm at that point, I'm still fully into powerlifting. I'm competing. We would be in the same weight class approximately.
Mm-hmm.
At that time. I'm oh my God.
Yeah.
What a monster.
Guy's literally built different, as they say.
Yeah, and I'm built differently too, but incorrectly comparatively. And I was if this dude ever competes, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
We're collectively in trouble. It's when a Jesse Norris signed up for Raw Nationals, we're I'm in danger.
Right. And so we've talked about this before. When it comes to strength performance, there's the neuromuscular skill coordination aspect, the ability to coordinate your body, muscles, contractions, bones, joints, everything in the right order and sequence to move the load or accomplish the task in as efficient of a way as possible. And then the other side is how much force production capacity do your muscles physically have, and what leverages do they have on your joints? So things like your muscle attachment points and tendon lengths and all sorts of other things that, we are more or less modifiable in order to improve our performance. And we know, this has been researched a decent amount that, if you just look at straight up the amount of muscle that someone carries, it's a decent proxy for what their force production performance is likely to look like. But the more and more trained someone gets, the tighter and tighter, meaning the closer that relationship holds, where greater muscle cross-sectional areas, bigger and bigger muscles tend to predict better and better performances more and more accurately the more well-trained you are, because that element of skill and coordination and stuff like that no longer becomes a significant differentiating variable between competitors. Mm-hmm. At that high level, people know how to squat super efficiently, super repeatedly. You and I, we don't even have to think about, squatting or a cue, or it just kind of happens. And so then it's just okay, well, how much force can you put out during this effort? And that at that very highly trained level is to some extent just proportional to how much overall cross-sectional area do you have, and then moderated or mediated or augmented by some of those other variables that you don't get to choose. How far from your joints do your tendons attach, and various other like little interesting, biochemical minutia like that. And so he was already quite gifted and highly trained, and then jumped up, 25 pounds in body weight and remains quite lean. So a large amount of that was muscle mass and muscle cross-sectional area on top of a highly trained, already kind of genetically gifted, athlete. And so, yeah, his total's going to jump up a lot. And I think that's a sufficient explanation for an improvement in performance at this level when you're highly trained and you move up a weight class, more so than just like mass. Because that, it's not to say that if he had gained, 25 pounds of body fat that his performance would have gone up. I think that's fairly obvious to anyone here. But yeah,
let me play devil's advocate here a little bit. Let's say in this world, and this is speculation. So let's say that Russ moved up this weight class. It actually did not represent a significant increase in muscle mass, but instead he no longer has to cut to make the lower weight class. Previously, he was in 83 kilos. And so it's not so much that he has any more active contractile muscle tissue, but rather he does not have to go through the stress of reducing calories, losing body water. We know that hypohydration, for example, as little as 2% can significantly compromise performance. Is this just like, oh, you don't have to cut anymore? Like or cut as much? It's maybe just like, oh yeah, I have a protein shake for your dinner the night before, rather than like, bro, I got a few weeks, I got to lose this weight, I got to sauna, whatever. Does that seem reasonable to you?
It just kind of depends on how much did he have to cut before and how much did he have to cut now. I mean, if he had said, I'm going to move up and I'm going to weigh 100 kilos, and instead of weighing 90 and cut to 83, now I'm going to go up to 100 and cut to 93 or something like that, then it may end up kind of coming out on the wash a little bit at that point. I mean, also depending on the rules of where you're competing, places you and I have competed in before that allowed 24-hour weigh-ins, some other places that even went further at 48-hour weigh-ins. I remember hearing about Dan Green doing like just some absolute gnarly cuts from, 250 pounds down, like losing 30 plus pounds or something like that in his 48-hour cut, which is risky and very unpleasant, I can imagine. So under these stricter conditions, you can't afford to try to be that aggressive, but maybe a small part of it.
So in January of 2025 of this year, at the Sheffield Powerlifting Championships, Russ weighed in at 182.6 pounds, and he totaled 1919, right? And so now July of 2025, he weighed in at 202.3 pounds and totaled 2,023 pounds. So I'm like, the odds of him gaining, let's call it 10 pounds of lean body mass in this amount of time, that's actual like muscle tissue.
Yep.
Highly unlikely.
Agree.
More likely is that he was already walking around at like 205, 210. I don't know this to be the case. I know that there's probably some internet, fans of his that are more tied in that are like, oh, I can speak to this. It seems more likely that he just didn't cut as much, just given the timing here. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, that timing variable adds some important context, although I don't think he was probably cutting over 20 pounds for a 2-hour weigh-in.
Let's hope not.
Competition. That seems insane.
Here's the wildest thing about his performance, and we'll move on to the third feat of strength, is that so he opened his squat at 711, which is at that point I believe was like 30 or 40 pounds under his best, which was like 749. So all right, decent opener. He misses his second attempt at 756. Okay, which would have been a competition PR. And then instead of being like, well, you got to repeat it, which is normally what most powerlifting coaches would advise, whatever, but I would probably favor in this high stakes situation, NAPF championships. Nah, screw it. I'm going 783. What, dude? That's incredible.
Yeah, those decisions are stressful on meet day, but it also kind of depends on the reason for the missed lift. If you missed that second one because, you started to go up and it was just far too heavy, then yeah, it's a fool's errand to try to jump up even higher. But if it's a minor technical fault, for example, like this isn't what happened to him. He got called on depth, I believe, by the side judges. But, I remember doing a meet where I think I, re-racked the weight like a split second too quickly or something, these kind of silly rules that are not actually directly related to your performance of the lift, but rather kind of just other aspects of the competition. Then you might say, okay, like I'll just fix that, and I know I have the strength and technical ability to actually execute the next lift up. So those are kind of game day or real time decisions that can get made by a confident, well trained, experienced athlete and their coach who understand the reason for missing a lift. But sometimes you'll see people who like absolutely struggle to grind out a weight and still call for a load increase, and it's like, well, that's not going to happen. So
yeah, unfortunate. All right, third impressive feat of strength. This happened at the CrossFit Games that took place in Albany, New York this past week. Now, for the fourth time in CrossFit Games history, there was a 1 rep max back squat event, although this is the first time it was a standalone event. Previously, there were 3 CrossFit totals. That's where you do a 1 rep max on a squat, a 1 rep max on an overhead press, and a 1 rep max on a deadlift. Those were done in 2007, 2018, and 2020. Well, this time they had a 1 rep max back squat only event. The winner of the men's division was Colton Mertens. He squatted 570 pounds to win the men's division. So of the 30 men's competitors who made it to the CrossFit Games finals, 6 of them squatted greater than 500. For comparison purposes, in 2020, when they held the CrossFit total that year, nobody squatted more than 500. And 86% of the field this year squatted 450 pounds or more, but only 30% squatted 450 or more in 2018. Let's also talk about the women. Mirjam van Roon won the women's division at 360 pounds for her 1 rep max back squat. 70% of the women's field this year squatted more than 300 pounds, where only 50% squatted over 300 pounds in 2018. Why are CrossFit Games athletes getting so much stronger? How is this happening? The CrossFit Games has been around for almost 20 years. And does this change how you would train somebody interested in competitive CrossFit?
Yeah, I watched part of this competitive event just out of interest. It was kind of cool to watch. They had each heat had I forget how many athletes, and they would just go around and they all worked up in their attempts. Interestingly, I actually think that they also allowed people to go down in weight, which kind of surprised me a little bit because one athlete missed their first and went down, and I was like, "Hold up, you're not supposed to be allowed to do that." But
powerlifting rules,
right? I guess you can do whatever you want in these events. But yeah, 570, 360, just incredibly impressive for athletes who can also do all the other things that they're expected to do. I don't think if you went to almost any competitive powerlifting meet, found somebody who squatted 570 or 360 and then asked them to do 150-foot handstand walk or something like that, I don't think that would go very well in the powerlifting meet hall. But at CrossFit Games, it's just like baseline expectation that you can do that you can run, swim, bike, do all these other things. So yeah, they're extremely impressive athletes. I will add a similar caveat to Colton Mertens here in this one as I did to Russ Orhii in the last one. So he squatted 570. He weighs 190 pounds. He's also 5'4".
Oh boy.
So he is quite short. Yes. And so I suspect that affords him certain advantages, for example, in events like this, and puts him, I imagine, at a pretty significant disadvantage in other events. I can imagine, for example, in like the rope climbs, maybe he might not do quite as hot compared with some of his lankier compatriots in the CrossFit Games. But nonetheless, I mean, very impressive performance here, and obviously impressive to be able to qualify for the games at all. I do remember us having some conversations, I would say back closer to or during the peak days of the CrossFit Games. I think in general, anyone would recognize that the games are somewhat in decline these days compared with where they've been in prior years for a variety of decisions that we will leave aside for now. But talking about the strength standards, quote unquote, or what kind of strength levels are, baseline expectations for, athletes to be competitive at the games level. And I remember during those years when you were comparing, say, 2018, 2020, we were probably of the opinion of like, if you're able to squat, say, somewhere like in the mid 4s, you're probably strong enough to hang with the top of the pack. And you should probably be building up a lot of your other kind of athletic traits and skills and abilities and things like that. And clearly now that is no longer the case. That squatting in the mid 4s, I mean, that was like the lowest end of the competitive heats when I was watching the guys. There were some other interesting just observations in terms of, strategy and technique. And you could tell those who had a powerlifting background from those who didn't, just in terms of like their setup methods and some of the equipment that they were using. And some athletes were low barring and a lot of them were high barring. And you could just kind of make some of these observations. But no doubt the overall loads have consistently and steadily increased. I suspect if you looked at a lot of other performance metrics at the games, for example, maybe their PR 5K time or their PR 2K row or their ability to swim or their longest handstand walk distance or, max pull-ups or something like that. Just, I suspect that all of these traits are going up to some degree in parallel. I don't necessarily think that, they've unlocked, oh, the secret was I just needed to get stronger compared to where I was before, so now the strength numbers are higher. I bet that not only the competition is driving these things up, but the selection of athletes is just pulling for freakier and freakier people who can do these things. So to your final point, does this change how you would train someone interested in competitive CrossFit? I'm sure that training methods have evolved over time, but I think it would be an oversimplification to say, oh, they figured out that you should just like get strong.
Yeah. Just do powerlifting.
I don't think that these data points, for example, would say, oh, I would really push my CrossFit athlete to build up a 1 rep max back squat. It's almost like these 1 rep max back squats are an emergent property of a freaky athlete training to do freaky things for really long periods of time. With like reasonable training and programming methods, a high responder will end up being able to demonstrate this kind of thing with probably a bit of practice and occasional exposure. I doubt that they're consistently and reliably training for their 1 rep max back squats, for example. This could have been many other different types of strength feats, or strength endurance feats, or strength power feats, and we'd be seeing very impressive things as well. Even though not all of those are getting like primary attention in their training program, just because there's so many things to be good at this level.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that there is much of a shift in how I would think about developing a CrossFit game. A person who's interested in competitive CrossFit, I agree that the people need to be strong, but I think that is more of like a happy accident of the rest of their training, which, yes, some of it is fully focused on getting stronger, predominantly in the Olympic lifts and the variations thereof, front squat, for example, push, press, things of that nature. But as far as actually like what would look like a powerlifting training block for strength, I don't think that's what would be advised based on this information. And further, just to throw a little wrinkle here, I look at the top 3 men competitors. Jason Hopper won overall. He squatted 500. Ricky Gerard got second. He squatted 455. And James Sprague got third. He squatted 465 for the 1RM. And so I'm kind of the opinion that these people are able to not only develop, but also sustain a high level of absolute strength, relatively high level of absolute strength, despite a very high training volume that also allows them to have excellent gymnastic skills, excellent Olympic weightlifting performance, great endurance performance, and running, cycling, whatever, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, because they're exposed to the barbell enough, they're also able to develop and sustain a high level of strength. But I wouldn't be programming, a lot of singles, for example, on the back squat. I don't know that I would train the bench press very often at all. I do think some exposure is probably reasonable just for like upper body strength development, but like not like a power lifter,
Yeah, I think that this is, again, not going to apply to most of the listening audience here because they're not freaks on this level. But it's almost like,
we like you for that. Thank you.
Yeah. But it's almost like these people who are placing at the games or who are just very highly competitive in this sport, it's almost like who is bestowed with the genetic gifts to tolerate the amount of training that needs to be done, and B, who has the most resistance to the interference effect. So, like when we talk to our general population listeners, we're like, hey, don't sweat this interference issue. You can do your strength and conditioning. You can do them on the same day. You and I both do a lot of same day strength and conditioning, all that kind of stuff. I think that when you're training 3+ times a day, doing all these different tasks, doing short stuff, fast stuff, heavy stuff, endurance effort, like there is a point where things undoubtedly interfere. And so it's almost like who is most resistant to the interference effect while also being able to tolerate the greatest training loads. And you wonder if that's sort of like, if you could distill that down into a metric, that would be like maybe predictive of somebody who is a very high performer in the CrossFit Games.
Now you just got to measure their fingers and see what the second to third digit ratio is. That's how you know.
Yeah.
It's a little inside joke. All right. Moving on to the National Football League. I don't know if you heard about this, but the NFL banned smelling salts. Kind of. The NFL has banned teams from providing smelling salts to players due to safety concerns, citing that they're unsafe and they're used to mask concussions. This comes from an FDA memo saying that, quote, adverse side effects of using unapproved ammonia inhalants, including shortness of breath, seizures, migraines, vomiting, diarrhea, and fainting from consumers after using these types of products possibly purchased through various websites. The players are allowed to bring and use their own ammonia inhalants, however. Other sports have done this too. Hockey Quebec, a branch of Hockey Canada that oversees amateur hockey in the province, they banned smelling salts in February, citing concern about their use by youth players. Just a little background here before we get you to weigh in on this. Ammonia inhalants, or quote, smelling salts, are where any number of preparations containing ammonium carbonate are combined with liquid, and these are widely available on the internet. Smelling salts are typically combinations of this ammonium carbonate, alcohol, and water, and a more accurate term for this mixture is actually aromatic spirits of ammonia. But nobody calls them that. They call them ammonia inhalants.
That sounds lovely.
Salts. Yeah, that's right. Historically, smelling salts were used to prevent and sometimes treat fainting, dizziness, and lightheadedness. Some older medical texts dating back to the 19th century describe using smelling salts to, quote, excite respiration to resuscitate a patient. They're said to work by this sort of inhalation reflex, being an irritant on the nose, to the nose and the lungs, and thereby increasing blood flow to the brain, increasing heart rate. And together, this resulting physiology is said to increase alertness and potentially performance. Now, there have been a number of studies on this. I reviewed this in a previous podcast. Basically shows no effect on performance, perhaps worsening performance in some applications like golf. There was a whole thing where people would use these ammonia inhalants prior to a putt, and they were generally worse at putting that way. As far as safety goes, there have been at least 2 case reports of smelling salt-related complications. In one, a female powerlifter had an allergic reaction after using an ammonia inhalant, and she required swift medical attention, but ultimately all of her symptoms resolved. In another instance, a 14-year-old boy collapsed during a running drill. He was administered an ammonia inhalant repeatedly before being transferred to a hospital where he subsequently passed away. It was later found out that the boy had sickle cell trait, which was thought to be exacerbated by repeated ammonia inhalant administration. So the question to you, Dr. Baraki, is this ban beneficial? Is it even necessary?
Tough question. This is interesting that they have gone this far here. I'm curious, they talk about concerns around the websites where athletes are getting these things from, but then allowing players to bring their own. So I found that to be a little bit of an odd wrinkle here. Like if you were primarily concerned about these supposed side effects, which I retain some skepticism that all of them are causally related to the use of the ammonia inhalant. Why are they still letting athletes bring and use their own? Unless it's just like, we don't want to be involved or related to like any sort of risk here. We want to be, it's kind of CYA. So like players, you can do your own thing and we're not responsible for what happens to you. But I wonder, in some of these situations, the idea that the ammonia inhalant is causing some of those symptoms, it feels like a bit of a stretch for some of the things. It almost makes me wonder, like, what is the reason that they're using it for some apparent like resuscitative event to like, make somebody feel better or wake up or something like that? And then are these potential side effects like actually effects of whatever caused that thing in the first place rather than a result of the ammonia inhalant capsule itself? This is something that I will admittedly say that I've not spent a great deal of time investigating, like what are the potential toxicities of these things. But again, my threshold of skepticism here is, I would say, relatively high in that these are things that are commonly used in the competitive powerlifting context. Both you and I have experience using these things. And it's interesting thinking back like about the rationale around their use, what you described about like exciting respiration or accelerating resuscitation or improving performance. And when you're using them, all of those things feel true. And I think that that's where a lot of that came from. It's just like a vibes-based justification for use. And then when it was studied a little bit more rigorously, it's like, oh, it turns out it doesn't really do any of those things, even though it like feels like it wakes you up and makes you focused and things like that. But that doesn't seem to pan out with more rigorous study. So I would want to see more rigorous evidence in the same way that we wanted rigorous evidence of efficacy.
Yeah.
Would want to see more rigorous evidence to support the idea that it can cause any of these adverse events. I don't necessarily have a problem with, any sporting organization setting its own rules and saying, hey, like, we're not going to, promote the use of these things. Certainly, like in the context of TBI and traumatic brain injuries and concussion in the NFL, like that's a big issue for sure. And ammonia is not a treatment for concussion or traumatic brain injury. So I'm fine with that, not being recommended for use in that context. But I don't want to blow things out of proportion and attribute negative effects or consequences to these things that aren't actually caused by them.
Yeah, I have two kind of points here. Point number one is that I do favor your rationale that this is like a CYA type thing. Like, look, if the teams are purchasing these inhalants and distributing them, well, they're on some level responsible for verifying, hey, these are good inhalants
Sure.
compared to potentially harmful ones. And when I look at the FDA memo, they have a handful of like manufacturers listed, like, hey, don't buy these ones. And it's unclear why, other than people have reported adverse effects from using them. And it's like, well, were they using them, quote, incorrectly or like overzealously or like whatever? I did have to laugh. One of the names of the labs is called Spirochete Research Labs.
That's oddly specific and unrelated to ammonia inhalants.
Yeah, if you don't know what a spirochete is, maybe Google that. You really want to get your treponema pallidum knowledge base up. You want to learn about some
Syphilis, Lyme
syphilis
disease,
and-
leptospirosis, different types of infections caused by these bacteria. Yeah, not clearly related to this issue, but
yeah. Maybe just a good general rule of thumb is don't buy supplements or like these things from people with weird, potentially dumb names like Insane Labs or Spirochete Research Lab. Maybe just don't. Also, there's a company listed on here called Nose Slap and Soul Slap, which would fall. That's just a good rule of thumb, I think, generally speaking. But I'm unclear as to like, did they identify a particular ingredient that was responsible? Because it can't just be ammonia, given the fact that when looking for case reports on adverse effects in sport, I only was able to find 2 papers, and the last one was over 20 years ago. And so I'm like, if there were bodies, or adverse effects that were happening in overwhelming amounts, I would expect more case reports. So this is kind of curious on that.
yeah, I mean, both you and I have been at powerlifting meets where by the end of the day, like the ground is just littered with the little pink capsules after they've been cracked and used before lifters' attempts. Some people that we know from the past would even use them routinely in training, like before most of their work sets. It's like, just statistically, this is going to take you out at some point if they were as risky as it might be suggested here. So I'm curious about contaminants or confounding by, what's the reason you passed out and felt like you needed a smelling salt afterwards rather than the smelling salt causing it.
My only other feedback here has to do with maybe the impact of sports on society. So just imagine if there's just a plethora of NFL players using these things, or just athletes, generally speaking, that are highly visible, and then kids or otherwise highly influential, influenceable, populations see this, and then they go out and buy this stuff and use them, perhaps not as intended or whatever, and then there's some unwanted effects there. That seems. It's kind of like chewing tobacco in baseball. It's like, okay, kids see this, and there's even like a gum, Big League Chew, and it's like, does this? Maybe we should think about this a little harder. I don't want to be like a nanny about this sort of stuff, but these effects, potentially real.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right, last topic here on the 3rd episode of the Rundown. Can't not talk about it. RFK Jr. in the news again. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the HHS, plans to cancel $500 million in funding for mRNA vaccines being developed to counter viruses that cause diseases such as the flu and COVID-19. This will impact at least 22 projects being led by major pharmaceutical companies, including Pfizer and Moderna, for vaccines against bird flu and other viruses, in addition to vaccines for certain types of cancer. That's been an emerging area of research for mRNA-related vaccines. Longtime critic RFK Jr. said in a video he posted on X, formerly Twitter, this week, he said that mRNA vaccines do not adequately prevent upper respiratory infections such as COVID-19 and the flu. He also announced that he was pulling the funding over the claims that mRNA technology poses more risks than benefits for these respiratory viruses. Children's Health Defense, this is an organization that RFK Jr. Founded. Well, their president, Mary Holland, not a doctor, said that while we believe that mRNA vaccines should be taken off the market, the announcement is a positive move towards protecting public health. Oh boy. Austin, any initial thoughts to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've watched the discourse around this topic and many others play out for the past 5 years or so. And it's been a challenging discourse to follow, frustrating in many ways. I think that, the conversation around them from the beginning has been flawed. The communication around these types of immunizations, as well as many others, to the general public has been flawed. And I think that even a lot of public health folks and healthcare professionals would recognize that that communication could have been improved. I don't think that either of us would be on board with the idea that these products or the technology, broadly speaking, poses more risk than benefit. I think that they are products that were rapidly developed on a background of research going back a few decades. They were tested on tens of thousands in randomized trial, placebo-controlled trial fashion early during the pandemic, allowing for pretty rapid deployment at about a year out. And in the aftermath, looking back retrospectively, we can see differential efficacy, meaning more or less effectiveness, both over time, which is common with many different sorts of vaccines and immunizations, as well as differences between patient groups. So for those who were at highest risk of severe disease and hospitalization and death, I think that the benefits of these products tended to outweigh the risks. And then for very, very low risk individuals, that calculus may have been different on an individual level for that person. And again, that's even a different conversation than like on a society level, big picture, the whole like herd immunity concept. And those are detailed conversations that I would say are a little beyond our scope here today. But basically, this is to say that I think he's probably painting with too broad of a brush in his comments, that there are potential uses for this technology that deserve study. The next question, though, is whether or to what extent that research, study, development ought to be promoted by, funded by the federal government and taxpayer dollars. And so that is more of a policy decision than anything else. And that can be set by elected and appointed officials based on the results of, our electoral system. And so I don't think that this technology is going to go away. I think that by removing this funding, some people might say, say goodbye to your cure for cancer or something, not to say anything about the idea of like curing cancer as a monolith is not a thing.
Right.
But if there is a curable, cancer by way of one of these mRNA vaccines, I don't think that pulling this funding is the thing that's going to completely eliminate that possibility. It may alter the timeline on which we might see something like that, right? It might have been otherwise sooner with federal support, and it might be more delayed. But I think that ultimately this research and development is just going to shift elsewhere. And that might mean even outside of our country. And it might be spearheaded and led by other countries, and they might end up, enjoying the benefits of it. Or if it ends up being a failure for a particular condition or outcome, then, they would suffer the failures of it. That's part of the reason why, going back decades, the federal government has funded and supported all sorts of research in the country. It is research that may not be immediately commercially beneficial to incentivize a private company to go after it. And it kind of takes on some amount of that risk to kind of get the ball rolling. And of course, not all projects are going to work out or all research studies are going to lead to some breakthrough discovery. But to give a different example of like the federal government originally funding like a study on the saliva of Gila monster venom from like decades ago, right? And you can see, I can just imagine that getting posted like rage bait on Twitter or social media saying, can you believe the government is funding us studying the saliva of lizards or something? It's like, yeah, well, fast forward 20 years and that's what led to GLP-1 agonists. That's how we discovered all of that, which are like changing the world in all sorts of generally positive ways. I think that both you and I would say. So this is admittedly a bit of a meandering answer of a variety of my thoughts on this topic. I think that there is a role for federal funding of research. I think that as the elected and appointed group of folks, they are, able to make these kind of policy decisions. I don't think that if their goal is like to shut down this kind of research and development for good, that this is going to do that. It's just going to shift elsewhere, I think. And that might be to other people's benefit potentially. And again, it'll just alter a lot of timelines for these things compared with the federal support that was previously planned and being given.
Yeah, I think it's well said regarding the policy aspect of this. Like if someone is of the opinion that research as it's currently done should be supported by the government, whether in our country or other countries, then it's like, okay, well, this in effect would stymie and certainly slow down research related to mRNA related
Hmm. Hmm.
therapeutics. If somebody is more of the opinion, well, this should be privatized, it should be done, by the potential manufacturers commercially, and so on and so forth. Well, then you're like, great, the government, now just saved some money. Where I fall on that is like, I don't see that being a viable way to support research in our country as it currently is. It's just too expensive. There's not enough privatized funding. And then, oh, by the way, when that research comes out, the first thing people say is like, oh, look who funded it. It's like, well, damned if you do, damned if you don't,
Right.
from that perspective. So that's my first issue. They're like, look, it's a policy thing. People elected these folks. So I guess I understand, but I'm very curious as to like what the reaction is going to be within the research world, and how does this set us back? We'll only be able to tell some years from now. I suspect it's not a good move for like the health trajectory of the community, but that's speculative. So I'm being charitable here, but there you go. My bigger issue here is that, look, we've granted this particular individual a large platform to speak from, right? The Department of Health and Human Services director, and then he says, well, mRNA technology, not just vaccines for COVID, but mRNA technology poses more risks than benefits for respiratory viruses at large, like what, bird flu, influenza, COVID, like et cetera, et cetera. There's way more than just those three, right? Sowing doubt and distrust in the public that already was like probably feeling, man, the communication during COVID like was not great, and there's a lot of stuff up in the air, and the internet being what it is. Yeah, that's challenging. And then also saying, hey, they didn't work, by the way. It's like, well, it'd be very challenging to support that with existing evidence. Did it work exactly as advertised or understood by many? Well, no, but that's a communication issue, not like an efficacy problem, broadly speaking. So all told, I'm like, look, if he would have said, look, we're cutting funding because we want to direct it towards this other thing that we think is more promising, we wouldn't be talking about it right now. But to come out and say we're cutting funding, we think these mRNA-based technology was generally bad, and more risky than beneficial. It's like, well, if we have another pandemic that requires the use or would benefit from the use of mRNA technology, we're kind of pickled. I was listening to an interview with the one of the former directors and health advisors for like 7 previous presidencies,
Mhm.
right? And he's like, look, I've lived, through a number of different vaccines or pandemics that have required some sort of vaccine development or whatever. And so with our existing technology unrelated to mRNA, the best we could do if we already had the technology, already had the genome, could do whatever with it, right? Knew what we were fighting. We could maybe make enough vaccines for a quarter of the population in 15 to 18 months. With mRNA technology, we could develop a vaccine for a pandemic in 12 months for everyone.
Mhm.
And he's like, so let's hope we don't have another pandemic,
Yeah.
So yeah, challenging to understand the rationale here.
Yeah, and as someone who was working in inpatient hospital units during the worst of those times and seeing a lot of folks, mostly middle-aged and older folks getting very ill and many of them dying. Also seeing the occasional unlucky young person who got very sick, potentially very ill, and a couple who even did die during that time. The idea that there are potential strategies that we have to shift that probability of risk, right? Which is the if we can communicate that more effectively, not that these things have the potential to abolish any chance that you will ever get an infection or that you will ever get sick again, which is where misconceptions came from, right? But instead, if you were somebody who would have otherwise died, maybe now you don't die. If you were someone who otherwise would have been hospitalized, maybe you don't get hospitalized. If you were otherwise going to get very ill, maybe now you only get mildly ill. And if you were going to get mildly ill, maybe you have an asymptomatic infection. Just like shifting that probability curve is what these types of tools can do for us. Communicating that concept more effectively, I think, can help people make a little bit more informed decisions based on their baseline risk profile and their health and wellness goals and things like that moving forward. There were plenty of people who declined, immunization for various reasons, personal, religious, whatever preferences, etc. And many of them, of course, did okay, especially if they were at low baseline risk. Some of them didn't do okay. And I sat face to face with some of those people in their literal dying moments when they said, well, I didn't want to take it because I was worried about this side effect. And I can't say that it would have saved their life, but it would have probably given them a better shot than they had otherwise. And so that's like I think it's useful to recognize the background of experience that I come at this question with is working and operating in that situation. And so as a potential tool to mitigate those types of bad things from happening, pulling the funding is something that is just, I'm saying it's just likely to set it back. Whether it's ultimately good or bad, I think that's too reductive of a question, right? These tools are more useful for some than others. Maybe it shifts in a way and the timelines shift, and 50 years from now, maybe it all ends up coming out in the wash somehow. It's just like the future, is not something that any of us have any great deal of insight into on this matter, but that's kind of where we stand today.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. All right. Well, that is a wrap here on the third episode of The Rundown here on the Barbell Medicine Podcast. Before we go, just a quick plug for our Barbell Medicine Plus subscription. If you want to listen to these podcasts ad-free, if you want discounts and early access to our new products and services, extended template samples, early access to articles, transcripts, consider signing up for Barbell Medicine Plus. About the cost of a cup of coffee for us every month. The first month is free. You can check that out in the link in the description below. But before you guys go anywhere, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. It really helps drive traffic to our podcast so we can keep bringing you all the latest nuance in health and fitness. Special shout out to Dr. Austin Baraki for joining us on the podcast. We'll catch you next week and every week right here on the Barbell Medicine Podcast.